Let's face it, bathrooms aren't exactly clean, and your cat's bathroom, don't get me started. If you're still using a traditional litter box, it's tracking messes, spreading odor.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
Okay. It's always something, right? Always something. I never changed my mic. Ever. My mic is always this mic. But for some reason, sometimes it decides. You gotta love technology, huh, guys? Thanks, Druid. Yeah, this week, I have just been having the craziest technology issues, and it's actually not just been technology. There have been a few things that happened this week that I'm like, what else? What else? Knocking on wood. There's just some weeks, right? Anyway, so today, if you have joined me and Jill and you were there on Tuesday, we're looking at some of the same info but different. So if you don't follow quilt nerding, Jill went to the Shelburne Museum in Vermont fairly recently, I guess last month, and she took a bunch of pictures, and one section of pictures she took was the exhibit of Helen Bruce's miniature vitrines, and they are absolutely fabulous, and I was so excited to see them. I did not know they were there. Most of what I knew about the Shelburne was their quilt collection. So anyway, I am very taken with Helen Bruce, and we're not going to look at the same stuff that Jill and I looked at on Tuesday. I have a couple of other things to look at. And in addition, I have an article to read about her, which I thought was very interesting. So we'll look at that. Real quick, before I get started, though, I did the AI experiment. So if you weren't here on Monday, I have been trying different things with AI productivity. And, I've been sort of mapping out like what makes sense to do with AI and what you should not do with AI. And I think I've come to some pretty good conclusions at this point, but things change literally daily. Like, what are you going to do? So, but anyway, what the project I was doing, so I've already tested taking pictures of things and getting AI to do something with that. In particular, my bookshelves, and getting AI to index my bookshelves. And from pictures, works great. But I thought, what about voiceover? Like if you were just, for instance, turned on a video and started, talking through and, showing the book. So that's what I did on Monday. Many of you were here, you saw it. And what happened eventually became what I was looking for, but it took more effort. So it was a really good test, and it definitely will inform some other types of indexing. And I think I mentioned I was going to start sort of indexing some of my needlework tools collection, and I sort of pooped out during our the stream on Monday, and it was kind of good because we had reading to do and everything. But I think that it does make sense to do that kind of thing, but video is not the way to do it, because the chat platforms, the large language models we have access to as, just regular old citizens, not academics or not IT professionals that are connected to some, particular research. We pretty much have access to the large language models that have been, opened up for consumer use. And those have limitations unless you're paying for like the big, huge models. So doing anything with video is not worth your time and energy because they just can't handle it. Now, not to say that AI can't deal with video. It's just other AI platforms. But audio and transcripts are really the best way to handle it. And, I think for my next test, I won't do video. Although, honestly, that is productivity, because if I do it with you guys, then I don't have to do it afterwards. It's like two birds, one stone. But I think just in terms of sort of using AI to index things that are not easily searchable on the internet, like books are easy. You know, if I, like, for instance, I was going to talk about this book. It's Art of the Needle by Henry Joyce. It's the quilts from 100 quilts from the Shelburne. And, you know, if I have a transcript of me talking and mentioning this book and I hand that off to AI, it can find that very easily. It can make the connection that this is the book I'm talking about. But if I have some kind of obscure needlework tool, AI may or may not really be able to understand what that is based on a picture or whatever. So in those cases, I think that the spoken word turned into a transcript, which is pretty easy to do on your phone. If you have a newer phone, I got this phone back in May, I think, and it's a Samsung, what is this? I don't even know. It's like a Samsung 24S or something like that. It has that capability. So, you know, you just turn on a voice recorder and you can tell it, you know, do a transcript while I'm recording. So, that's pretty big, honestly. If you didn't know that if you have a newer phone, if you didn't know I could do that, or, you know, apps, I think even if your phone is not super new, I think there are apps that will do it for you. I didn't really try that out on my own old phone. But, yeah, I mean, so by virtue of my profession, I had been working with a lot of voiceover and, you know, trying to get audio from videos, you know, into transcript format, both for just closed captioning and also for translation. And this is a few years ago, but not that long ago, like early pandemic. And, you know, it was slow, it was clunky, it wasn't necessarily all that reliable. There certainly were voiceover programs. I remember Dragon Speak was one that I played around with, like, way back. I think there were some better programs that were not terribly expensive, but, you know, the whole idea of it being something that was ubiquitous, it just wasn't out there. You had to seek out things, and sometimes they were good, sometimes they were bad. But I had started working with one of the Amazon tools called Polly, Polly, as in, like, you know, Polly want a cracker. And that one, you know, give or take, it was good sometimes it wasn't, but now it's just a given. You know, and that's the kind of stuff that predictive types of technology, and I'm not necessarily saying it's always AI, sometimes it's just algorithms and, you know, programming, but that type of technology has just come like leaps and bounds, and now you factor in AI, and there really are amazing things that you can do with it. And, you know, I keep going back to the fact, and I won't talk about AI too much more, but I come back to the fact that, you know, we are at a really interesting time. If you guys, and, you know, I know lots of you that are here with me for my streams are ladies of a certain age, you know, just like myself. So you do remember the beginnings of the internet. And, you know, I think back to the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, just pre 9/11. We were having this big IT boom. And, you know, there was a lot of large cities, my own Baltimore being one of them, that were kind of vying to become like the technology center of the United States, and it ended up in Silicon Valley. And you know, by virtue of the fact that, I don't know, there was just stuff out there that, you know, everybody's centered around Silicon Valley. And you know, Microsoft was up in Washington, and so I guess it just, that's where the technology people flock to. But it's so weird to me to think that Google hasn't been around all that long. YouTube hasn't been around all that long. We feel like it has, but it really hasn't. I remember the days before those things. And but when those things arrived on the scene, and then within the next 5 to 10 years, then social media arrived on the scene. And these kind of checkpoints, or I don't, metrics, benchmarks, I don't know, like these points in the chronology, you know, for better or for worse, have, you know, there have been times when major problems are created. And then, you know, like the good guys and government regulations and all that stuff catches up. I think probably the biggest challenge for us right now is that regulations and safety protocols have just not caught up yet. And I mean, gosh, the government, we know how slow the government moves. And I've been seeing some stories about what the feds are doing with AI that scares me a little bit, but I'm not going to go there. But anyway, I think the point is we are at a point right now where AI is, you know, we're identifying ways that it can be really useful, very helpful, revolutionary for human productivity. But we're also recognizing that there's people that are having like mental breaks because of these conversations they're having with chatbots. We see the proliferation of AI slop. And that's just like the bizarre videos and weird images and things people are trying to pass off as real that are not, and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's basically stuff that doesn't serve a purpose. You know, and there's lots of photographs that people take out there that don't serve a purpose. I'd call that slop too. But in any event, I just, you know, I keep plugging along, and I really value any thoughts you guys have. I know there's a couple of you that have used AI and have kind of given me, you know, a little bit of info about your experience and what you've been doing with it. So I appreciate that. Keep the thoughts coming. And I mean, even the contrary, you know, I know there's a couple folks that sort of early on in my AI adventures, who are friends of the stream and, you know, have a contrary take on it. And I appreciate that. I love that dialogue. I love to, you know, sort of explore, like, what am I not thinking about? What am I not experiencing that other people are? So anyway, long story short, we plug on with AI. And yeah, I'm getting excited about doing my presentation for AQSG, and that's what these tests are about. So all right, let us move on to Helen Bruce. And if you guys did not get a chance to see what Jill and I looked at, you gotta go look at that. I'll grab the link in a second. But I wanted to plug this book because when we talk about the Shelburne, I'm always like, oh, it's right back there on my bookshelf, and I'm reorganizing all my books. So this one, it's The Art of the Needle, by Henry Joyce. And it is a fantastic book. Big full-size pages of quilts. And you know, if you followed along with Mary Fons on Quilt Nerd, I found out about this book from her. So, Florence Pito. Not this one. This one. That's Florence Pito. She made that quilt. Yeah, actually, Martha Custis. This one is Martha Custis. I think she's George Washington's. Yeah, she's George Washington's step-granddaughter, because I think Martha Washington and George Washington did not have children, but yeah, so she's Martha Washington's granddaughter. So, I mean, look at that. They've got Martha Washington's granddaughter's quilt and Florence Pito's quilt. They've got good quilts there. So, I just wanted to plug this book because if you are interested in what the Shelburne has quilt-wise, this is the stuff they have. It's really, really delightful stuff. I mean, look at these. These crazy quilts are phenomenal. These, if I can get them up close enough. I didn't take pictures, but you can see they're animals inside the crazy quilts, and they're just stunning. I absolutely love them. These are Delphia Noyce Haskins, or her daughter Ada Haskins. So they made, you know, she made these quilts. Yeah, these are all her. So fabulous stuff. And you know, it seems to me that when she had the chance, let's back up a little bit. So the Shelburne came to be in the early 1950s. It's a big property in Vermont. and a very wealthy woman named Electra Havermeyer Webb got her hands on this property. And I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, it came through like her husband or something. And she had all these buildings moved there, these old buildings, and she started building this museum space in this big spot. She got this giant paddle boat called the Ticonderoga there. So like you can literally go into this it's not dry docked, it's sitting on a field, and you can go in and visit it. I'm assuming you still can. And then she has the was it the hat and perfume building, has all kinds of, like, she collected hat boxes, and I think the perfume stuff was really about kind of the art related to perfume. And anyway, so, you know, there's all the other textiles, quilts and other textiles, and then Helen Bruce's stuff, which we're going to look at. So I have never been to the Shelburne. I want to go to the Shelburne. They're one of those places, because it's so outdoorsy, like you have to walk or take a little, it's like a little tram kind of thing around. They close during the winter. I mean, it's Vermont. So they're only open from, I think it's May to October. So it's a very short season. I guess it's just because the snow is there late, potentially, and the snow starts early there. I don't think I've ever been to Vermont at all. I've traveled a bit in the New England, but in any event, I'm very excited to go there eventually. And if you are in that area and have never gone, you should check it out, because they just have really good stuff. And Florence Pito was friends with Electra, and she helped Electra with the quilts. So she helped source quilts. So some of this quilt collection, some of the quilts that are in this book, Florence Pito was directly responsible for sourcing for Electra. And then, of course, Florence Pito has quilts there, you know, that she made. So, yeah, so even if you can't make it there, get this book. It's a good book. I don't think it was published too terribly long ago either. Let's see. 2003, so it's been around for a little bit. But yeah, I mean, like, what a great book. You know, we always complain about, you know, the fact that you can never see the details in a book, of, you know, in quilts, but they did a really good job with this one. It's produced by the Shelburne, apparently. Yeah, this is the Shelburne Museum created this. So yeah, they did a nice job. Okay, so let's look at Helen Bruce. There's not a lot known about Helen Bruce. That disappointed me, of course. But, all right, where's my mouse? So just Googling Helen Bruce miniatures, I think you pretty much find everything about her that's out there. There's not much. Most of what I found was where her miniatures went to auction, and I mean, that's kind of what exists. Some of it is not correct. There's one of the major auction houses that has Electra Havermeyer's Webb her name listed as Elizabeth Webb. So, you know, there's just, the auction houses just didn't have all the right information. So I don't know that it's a good idea to take what they say as truth. But there's apparently a painter, a British painter named Helen Bruce. So, and she's contemporary. Like, I think she's alive right now and painting. So she's not the person we want to look at. So, yeah. And I mean, I literally, I scrolled through a lot of pages and, you know, not finding anything about Helen Bruce other than the things that she made. So let us look at a couple of these things, and some of them I have a little bit of detail on, but also I don't want to have accounts with all of these auction sites just because. So some of them I can't get more than just the pictures. You can't get what the amount they sold for unless you have an account. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. Okay, so let's look at these. This is the first one. This was, let's see, it has the auction house's name. I don't think it does. So this comes from an estate, but I'm not seeing. Anyway, it was on Invaluable, which is just, again, one of those big auction sites. So this one is the Lady Doll Diorama, La Vie en Miniature by Helen Bruce, dated 1953. And yeah, I mean, these were not made all that long ago. I mean, I think of the 50s. My mom was alive in the 50s. I don't think of it as being that long ago. But what I discovered is some of the things in these little vitrines, and I'll zoom out so you can see what they look like. This one, they kind of have like a curved front. Some of them have like, this one looks like it's in like a plexiglass box, but some of the ones in the museum at the Shelburne actually have like curved front glass. Some of them have their own lighting system installed that Helen Bruce apparently gave Electra Webb the details of like how to light her pieces. So they're very detailed. But what I discovered she did, some of the items in these little vignettes, she made. Others she collected. She was actually an antique stealer. So 18th century antiques was what she focused on. And so some of this stuff is literally 18th century. Some of it's 19th century. And some of it are things that she created from scratch. And in some cases, I think it's kind of hard to tell what's what. So what I have figured out about the dolls, this was something we weren't sure about, because the dolls all kind of look a little bit different. Some of them are sort of like this. They're sort of smooth, kind of glossy. Others look like their faces might be like a painted fabric, maybe. And what I figured out is they're fashion dolls from either the late 18th century or early 19th century. And they're either wood or they're wax. And that is what these dolls at this time were made of. They were often, Germany was a big producer of these. And I think France did some too at that time period. But you can see kind of this little hand is very, basic. And it maybe has some little inscribing of fingers, but basically they're these sort of little paw-like hands. And I think that's probably indicative of what the make of some of these is. And I'm not knowledgeable enough to be able to look at this and tell. I do know some people that have done extensive research in, antique dolls and could look right at this and say, oh, that's this. But I to the best of my knowledge, this is either wood or wax. And I don't know why. I kind of suspect it's wax, but again, I couldn't be too terribly sure. Some of the ones we looked at the Shelburne pictures that Jill took, definitely there was one I could tell was wax because face was kind of sagged a little bit, and so I think that it just got too warm. I mean, that's the terrible thing about a wax doll is it has got to be kept cool or it's gonna start melting. And then some of the other ones I could tell were definitely China, so like bisque or China. So anyway, she has a lot of pieces that are little market scenes, little ladies in their period outfits. I think their outfits are pretty good, just based on what I know about these time periods and what this costuming should look like. And then other little things, you could kind of look and see, like, this looks like it was some kind of like brooch or metal stamping or something. Some of these little paintings and things are actual miniature, like paintings by miniaturists. These I'm not entirely sure. But some of their portraits that are in some of these, and they are definitely painted by miniaturists. So yeah, I just, so fascinating. And how detailed some of this stuff is. What I think my favorite ones are the ones with these little dolls, because these little dolls can't possibly be more than like an inch or so tall, maybe 2 inches tops. But I think that the subject dolls are only so big. So the very fact that she has either found or made these itty bitty little dolls, and I mean, look at these little details. Look at these little things. I mean, they're just amazing. These are like on a little wooden platform. So I don't know if these were existing items. You can look, these little chickens, those are probably some type of like children's toy or some kind of folk art. But she very carefully collected and sourced all of these little items. I mean, look, there's a little tiny iron, looks like a little kettle. All these little things. And she was somewhat elderly when she was older when she was working full time at this. I think these pictures are all the same. Yeah. So Electra Havermeyer Webb, they got to be good friends. They corresponded, and Electra commissioned her to make 37 of these things. This one's a little lady. This one I think is for sale right now at Gigi's Dolls and Sherry's Teddy Bears. $875, which is kind of a bargain, because we're going to look at with at least 2 other auctions, they went for like $4,000 and $4,500. So these are valuable, to collectors. And this one you can see has the curved vitrine around it. So it's like a curved glass front. But this little lady, oh my goodness, look at her. And yet another case where could be wax. See, when you look at this, and I think what they did, as far as I know with wax, I think it was made in a mold, but like a very simple mold. And then it was painted with like a shellac. So then it could be, color could be added to it. I'm pretty sure that's what we're seeing here. And like, for instance, there's something going on here with this arm that's different than this arm. So, you could draw some conclusions. But in terms of looking at the costuming, and presumably, well, I don't know to say one way or the other whether she dressed these dolls or these dolls came already dressed, or it's a combination. I suspect maybe it's a combination. She may have added or redressed dolls, and I suspect some of them may have already come dressed. This one I'm not sure, because this is these pinked edges. That is a very period specific technique in fabric, and you need a special tool to do this. Now, to say, did Helen Bruce have that tool? Maybe. Who knows? But it's not a tool that would be like very common to have in one's sewing kit in the mid 20th century. So, I suspect this one was already pre-made or, pre-dressed. But gosh, look at, again, these are dolls that are not that huge. So look at the detail in this. And her little parasol. I mean, look at that. Look at the details in that. And whether she sourced it or she made it, it's still really exquisite. And, I just can't help myself when it comes to miniatures. But this level of craftsmanship, not long ago when I came back from England, I showed you guys the Queen's Doll's House stuff. And, that I think the quality of some of these items definitely are right up there with the Queen's Doll's House. This one, I don't think we can zoom in on this one, but you can see like these are like, I think maybe little bits of needlework. No, they're paintings. Yeah, these are paintings. This is a little bit of needlework though. I think this is to show the little doll is supposed to be stitching. These little bits of greenery. And these little pieces of furniture are the ones that get me. Again, I'm assuming that these may have been things that were already manufactured that she got her hands on, or things that maybe she altered. Because this type of marquetry and carpentry on little teeny things is really no easier than building the thing large sized. I mean, granted, you're using much tinier tools and things, but you still have to have pretty exacting and, craftsmanship skills to know how to make this and make it work, make it look like an actual big size chair, and this one, I just love this one. So this was $4,000, or is $4,000. I don't know. I'm looking at this. This is giving me the idea that maybe this one is for sale, because it's got an add to cart. So if you got $4,000 hanging around, you can go buy this. But this one is this little hat shop, I guess. You've got little hats on these busts that are meant to be, mannequins. Aren't they precious? Look at them. And you can see here, like, the front of it, this is ribbon, that, maybe it already came like this, already printed like this. I suspect it did. And she's cut it and applied it there to look like window treatments and like a little, this table covering or something. So, really cute stuff, right? I just love little things so much. Can't help myself. I can't tell exactly what these are made of. I was thinking maybe these might have been either wood, carved and painted wood, or maybe paper mache, but I think they look a little too solid to be paper mache. I don't know. It's really hard to tell when you find things like this. It's like, oh, if only I could find it, see it in person and like be able to touch it. One thing I know, like down here, you can see this paper. Let me see if, yeah, you can see this kind of marbled floor. That would have been like a book paper. If you've seen old books that have the beautiful marbled end pages, that's what she was using for this. This wallpaper looks like it's fabric. So she was using fabrics and like actual hand printed wallpapers and things for these. So, okay, so let us look at, bear with me and let me find, here we go. So I'm going to read you an article, and then I'll show you the pictures of it. Well, let me show you a couple pictures first so that you can. So this piece we did look at. This one is at the Shelburne, and this was probably her most ambitious piece. And we're gonna, when I read this to you, you'll hear kind of, her feelings about this piece. It stressed her out, it sounds like. And she talks about what some of these things actually are. And there's the other side of it. It's a very large piece, and I think they say it here, like this piece, this little haberdashery is 10 times as much stuff in it as all of her other ones. So this is another one that's at the Shelburne that we looked at. I know I said we weren't going to look at them again, but they're in Piecework. So this Piecework magazine, I think it's May, June 1998. So it's early on in Piecework history. If you are a Piecework subscriber at this present time, you can actually get access to PDF versions of all of their magazines from the past. And then they have like another tier that you can belong to that gives you like access to a whole bunch of different projects and things. But I am very happy with my subscription and being able to get access to this kind of stuff. So just a heads up if you didn't know. If you, this is another one I know we looked at, because I was enamored with these tiny chairs. And I mean, look at this little teeny, I don't want to zoom in too much more because it won't be clear, but there's a teeny tiny little doll there that I can't even fathom. I love tiny things, and I'm always amazed by them, but I'm ultra amazed by that and these little chairs. So I'm gonna read this, and let me find something for you to look at. So you can look at while I read. So, and yes, this is a copyright infringement, but I don't think the people at Piecework would be too angry. So this article, like I said, it's from 1998, and it's called Helen Bruce, Electra Web and Their Miniature Vitrines by Celia Y. Oliver. And let me tell you real quick, Celia was, I'm assuming, although she could very well still be there, but I'm assuming she was the curator there. I'd have to look and see where she is now. But it says Celia Y. Oliver is a curator of textiles at the Shelburne Museum in Shelburne, Vermont, and author of Enduring Grace, Quilts from the Shelburne Museum Collection, 1997. The Shelburne Museum is open daily from May to October. So, she had like complete access to, because she was a curator there, she had complete access to all of the information about these little vignettes. So we know she's correct. It's trustworthy research. All right. So she says, the Hat and Fragrance Gallery, that's what it was called, the Hat and Fragrance Gallery of the Shelburne Museum, a complex of 32 buildings in Shelburne, Vermont, is home to one of the largest collections of textiles and needlework in the country. In one small room is a series of vitrines, or glass showcases, containing miniature versions of late 18th and early 19th century rooms. These miniature scenes, among them a parlor, sitting room, library, and drawing room, outdoor toy vendors, and ladies' hat and dress shops, are the work of Helen Bruce, a collector of 18th century antiques and a miniatures enthusiast. Each scene includes many antique miniatures collected during Helen's travels, as well as accessories that she fashioned from wood, ceramics, and metal. The wooden walls are covered with antique wallpaper and wall and book papers, and window curtains and shades are made with scraps of 18th and 19th century fabrics, lace, and paper. These beautifully designed and crafted rooms, together with correspondence, that's the important part, correspondence in the Shelburne Museum's archives between Electra Havermeyer Webb, the museum's founder, and Helen Bruce, tell the story of Helen's career as a miniature collector and model maker, her 10-year friendship with Electra, and their work together. Oh, and by the way, this shop measures 28 by 39 by 12 inches. So I'm thinking it's 12 inches deep, but it's 28 by 39 inches big. So, it's fairly large considering what it is. Okay. Electra meets Helen. Electra Webb, a collector of 18th and 19th century antiques and folk art, shared Helen's enthusiasm for collecting miniature dolls, dollhouses, and accessories. It is likely that they first met in New York City during the late 1940s when Helen owned a small antique shop there. A card from the period announces, Mrs. Bruce, 725 Madison Avenue, invites you to her shop to see a new shipment of antiques from France and England. A note on the back in Electra's handwriting refers to items that she must have seen during her visit. Doll, boy with rat trap, Victorian rag doll, and 18th century paper invitation. Boy with rat trap. Duh. The first letter from Helen to Electra, dated October 18th, 1951, confirms that the women had begun their business relationship sometime before, although the exact date is not known. Helen listed and described a number of miniature rooms that she had sent to Mrs. Webb in Vermont. And one thing that Celia mentions in here a few times is that they always called each other Mrs. Webb, Mrs. Bruce. And this is something that I also noticed in the correspondence of Florence Pito and Elizabeth. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on her last name? Her stuff is at Western Kentucky University. I looked at it because she had also corresponded with Dr. Dunton, and I'm completely blanking on her name right now. But anyway, they also, for years, corresponded and talked to each other as Mrs. Pito and Mrs. Why can't I think of her name? Anyway, but you know, and I feel like Cecilia Webb is like kind of making, I'm not making a big deal necessarily, but kind of like noticing it and saying, they did this. And I will say that my grandmother was the same way. My grandmother never in her entire life ever referred to my other grandparents by their first names. She always referred to them as Mr. and Mrs. Their last name was Capps. And they referred to her as Mrs. West. They just, that is what people did. And I imagine, maybe you guys noticed that too, about people. I just think there was, early 20th century, up through, I guess, the 60s, a lot of people just did not do first names. I would say even now, today, we still might do Mr. or Mrs. for somebody we don't know very well, or on our first meeting of them. But we're all adults and we get to a point where we call each other by our first names usually. And even, I would even say and oftentimes even younger people, children will eventually begin calling somebody by their first name, or they'll call them, I get called Ms. Stephanie a lot. I'm always like, Ms. Stephanie, good Lord. But it was just an etiquette thing, I guess. But anyway, I digress. So, by 1951, Helen was living in Los Angeles, California, but Electra had evidently already made arrangements for Helen to construct other miniature scenes. The October 18th letter states, "I am finishing the case with fan you wanted me to mount with a doll. It is the ivory one printed in gay colors." The list also refers to miniatures which vary in date from the 18th century and directoire style. I'm not sure what that is. Directoire. As a style, I'm guessing it just has to do with that period of time. So late 18th century and directoire style to about 1830. Shell dolls, fan cases, and an 18th century English dollhouse. These are undoubtedly the miniature scenes mounted in half-round glass frames that Electra eventually included in the Hat and Fragrance Gallery when it opened in 1952. It is likely that Helen had sold these miniature scenes to Electra before she moved to California, as Boscobel Restoration in Garrison, New York, has a group of 7 scenes that are clearly part of Helen's original set. Boscobel is another thing I kind of found. I haven't looked in real specifics about them, but she mentions them, and I think they might still be around in some capacity. Celia is mentioning them in 98, and Helen is mentioning them in the 50s, or the 60s. So, Helen commented on Electra's exhibit plans. "I think you are right to keep my cases by themselves. I am sure whatever you do, or whatever arrangement you make, it will be wonderful, and only as you could do it. I read all you send with the greatest interest. I am sure it is the most interesting museum in the country. What a wonderful thing you have done." Which I think is really kind of funny, right? Let's see. Bear with me a sec here. I'm reorganizing my desktop. Ugh. I haven't been using my other my third. So, okay. Right, Robin? They are amazing. The little details are, like I said, the dolls, just by virtue of the fact that they're period dolls, are a little weird at times, but the little tiny details are just, I mean, to me they are definitely at the level in some cases of the Queen's Doll's house. Granted, there's not as much stuff in them except the little market scenes, but yeah. True. You have an ex-BF who still calls you Ms. I also sign my name that way in correspondence with your attorney. Miss Druid. All right. So the hat and dress shop. So this is the one we just looked at. Let me give you another glance at it real quick. So again, this is what it looked like. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see at least this half of it, that half of it. But like all these little things on the shelves, and just, I mean, it truly looks like, you know, it truly looks like what it is supposed to portray, I think. I mean, just, it's so charming. I could I can't help myself but just be really delighted by it. Okay. So the hat and dress shop. Helen and Electra exchanged letters every few weeks over the next 9 years, and the women continued to address each other as Mrs. Webb and Mrs. Bruce until 1953. Although most of the letters in the museum archives are those Helen sent to Electra, a few are carbon copies of Electra's typewritten letters. The rest were probably written by hand, and no record of them exists. It is often clear from Helen's letters, however, that she is responding to a specific question or idea posed in a letter she has received from her friend in Vermont. Yeah, and it's frustrating when you don't have both sides of a conversation. But one of the beautiful things I think that people did with correspondence at that time is they sort of wrote in full ideas. And if they were asked a question, they would give enough, they would frame it in a way that their answer in a way that you kind of could get the gist of what they've been asked, if not fully just rephrasing the question. So I have to give, mid-century writers some credit, that they were prolific enough that if you don't have the entire conversation and you only have one side of it, at least you can kind of figure out what they were talking about. And I suspect that's the case with these letters. In her letter of October 18th, 1951, Helen responded to Electra's proposal that Helen create a miniature country store for the gallery. After reading your letter of the 13th, I think I would be more successful at making a dress or ladies' shop than the country store, for I feel sure you must have one and more American than I could do. It honestly sounds like she didn't want to make one. I have so many amusing things, too large for the small cases. Bottle, books, boxes, etc. Dolls' dresses, small shoes, that I think, if you agree, I will do that. Electra agreed, and on October 29th, Helen wrote, I am glad you would like the dress shop, and as soon as I can, I shall start it. The dress shop, now on exhibit at the museum, was an ambitious project for Helen. The other miniature scenes she created are about 1/10 its size. In her accompanying notes, Helen described the shop. She says, 2 ladies are standing at the counter of the shop. The customer has a blue silk dress, green hat with feathers, holding a white parasol. The saleswoman has a striped black and white dress, cape of white net trimmed with real ribbon, small net white apron, holding an embroidered bag. A young girl dressed in white is sitting with her feet on a needlepoint footstool. The dresses, dolls, tiny pincushion, hand mirror, bone fan, and spool box are all 1825 to 1830. So these were teeny tiny little things that she apparently got that were already made that somebody had made in the early 1800s for, we would assume, a dollhouse. The wallpaper comes from a 17th century portfolio. The watercolor over the shop window was made by a French prisoner of war in 1812. That line, I was like, what? So, you know what? Bear with me 1 minute, and let me find a picture of it so that we can just, as she describes it, we can look at these things, because let's see if I can find a picture of it. Jill was going to send me her pictures, but she has not done that yet. Oh, poop. I don't see that here. Well, okay. Bear with me, and I have a sneaky little way of doing this. Yeah, these just, I just can't help myself. Miniatures are just something that I just, I don't know that I know anybody that isn't at least a little bit amazed by miniatures. Okay, it's at the end of the magazine, so. Okay, here we go. Okay, so she says, the watercolor over the shop window was made by a French prisoner of war. So that is probably this. I don't see, I think this is the only window. So it's this little piece here. Made by a prisoner of war in 1812. I mean, come on. Yeah, that's the only window other than these ones at the top, so. Okay. The trumeaux, or mirrors, have glass paintings of 1825 or earlier. I'm not sure. I'm looking to see paintings on mirrors. I don't know if you guys are seeing something I'm not seeing, but I'm not sure what paintings on mirrors she means. It very well could be like one of these itty bitty little things in here that I can't see very well. Sorry for scrolling up and down. Yeah, that can be annoying. The vases holding the feathers are Italian and are of the same date. The hat boxes are made from 18th century book papers. So that's these up here. The little hat boxes. So she clearly made those herself. And there's a ton of them. There's some up here too, little boxes. There's a little tiny cape up there. Oh, and by the way, she says that this woman's hat is green. So I'm guessing it's either like a really yellowy green, or the photography in this didn't do it justice. Because I remember when Jill showed her picture, it was kind of hard to tell what color her hat was. Okay. And let's see vases holding feathers. So that's this down here as a vase, and these are all the holding the feathers. Look at there's tiny little gloves there. Just ridiculous. This is so cute. This is the little girl with her feet on a needlepoint footstool. The chandelier is Venetian, 18th century. So that's this. The 3 chairs were found in Mexico, 1825 to 1830. So this is one of the chairs. This is the second chair. And then I think the other chair is right on the edge of the other page. The window shades and bolts of cloth are silk ribbons, 1823. So I think that is this stuff up here. And then these shades up here. Let me scroll back down so you can see. Yeah, here's more bolts of cloth here. These are just pieces of cloth draped, and then that's a ribbon there as well. So these would be ribbons too, I assume. Very pretty stuff. Okay. In June 1952, Helen was still at work on the hat and dress shop. Knowing that the Hat and Fragrance Gallery was to open in the fall, she worried about having it completed on time. On June 30th, she wrote to Electra, I am working every moment on the dress and hat shop, but it does not go very rapidly as I must make everything, and just when I think it is all planned, something does not look as I hoped, and that changes it all. However, in the end, I think it will be amusing, and I am hurrying so that the opening in the wall I am hurrying as that opening in the wall must be filled. Unfortunately, I am slowing up, I fear. Just had my 72nd birthday and do so much and then seem to be utterly exhausted. On September 8th, 1952, with the shop completed at last, Helen sent Electra instructions as to how to install the vitrine. The background can be pasted on the back of the recess in the wall. And so these are actually like installed, it sounds like. Like they aren't just hanging on the wall, but they're like installed into the wall. It is planned so that the trees and houses in the distance show through the back door and only the sky through the windows on the balcony. So that would be here. And then these would have the scene. The landscape behind the doll looking through the window. Is there a doll looking through the window? Oh my goodness, is there somebody in the back of this? I think there is. I think there's a lady doll standing there. The landscape behind the doll looking through the window should be lighted above the scene to throw light through the window into the shop, and the doll should be a silhouette with the light behind her. Description of the things in the case is pasted on the right-hand side at back. The vase at right of door has a pin in front to be removed. The chandelier is packed separately and hangs from the hook in the ceiling part. So the vase at the right of the door, I guess that she means this, unless this lady is covering something up that's there. Chandelier packed separately. I guess it would just be sort of installed there on a little hook. By late September, Helen was planning a trip to Vermont to visit Electra and to see the museum. And of course, to see her miniature scenes on exhibit for the first time. On September 22nd, she wrote to Electra, I am so excited over the trip and seeing you again and the museum, which will mean so much to me. Helen must have been pleased and honored to read the label that Electra had placed in the Bruce room of the Hat and Fragrance Gallery. And this is what that label says. If visitors enjoy this unit, its success is greatly due to the interest and hard work of Mrs. Helen Bruce of California, who has worked with me over all the small cases. She has collected the charming old dolls, materials, and items contained in the showcases. She is one of the most talented and gifted women I have ever met, and I am proud to have so much of her work displayed here. That's sweet. Later projects. Actually, you know what? Before that, let me get to this one little. It's a little sidebar thing that they wrote. So little is known about Helen, and this is terrible. Her maiden name was Mellon. Her name was Helen Mellon. Mellon, like Carnegie Mellon. So Helen Mellon Bruce. Little is known about her early life and collecting career, except the information that can be gleaned from her letters to Electra Webb. She was born on June 14th, 1880, and married Henry Patrick Bruce. They had a son named Roy, who later lived in California near his mother. In the early 1950s, she lived in Los Angeles at 932 North La Cienega Boulevard, where she operated a shop specializing in 18th century antiques. And in 1956, she moved to Pacific Palisades, where she lived at 527 Frontera Drive. And then it asks if, anybody has information about her or her work to contact Celia Oliver. I think it's interesting that she went from New York to California and had an antique shop in both places in the 1950s. I think that, I guess because we don't know much about her husband, at least according to these writings, it's hard to tell, was she from... her last name was Mellon. Did she have family money? Did that enable her to do this kind of, bi-coastal move? The 1950s was, people just weren't back and forth between coasts like they are today. And certainly even today, moving your antique business from New York to California would be like a really big undertaking. Okay, so later projects. Between 1951 and 1960, Helen worked on a number of projects that Electra commissioned. During a return visit to the museum in 1953, she worked with the staff to catalog its collection of miniature scenes, shell pictures, and fan cases. I don't know what a fan case looks like. I assume it's probably just like a little case, because a folded up fan, and I have one here. It's not that big. So I'm guessing a fan case would be sort of just a small thing. So let's see. The collection includes 37 scenes and fan cases made by Helen Bruce and 10 antique scenes that she acquired in Europe, including the Nun's Room grotto scene and a coiled paper theater entitled Masquerade. So I'm guessing those were things that Jill did not get pictures of, because those don't ring a bell. And I'm assuming that those little antique scenes are not in the Bruce room. That's not clear from this article. Helen's correspondence with Electra includes notes on other projects, such as Fantasy of Shells, a large, elaborate scene of shepherds, shepherdesses, and sheep made entirely of shells and coral. Shell artwork is a whole nother thing. I think I actually talked about one of the shell pieces that's from the late 1700s. That's at a museum in Philadelphia, or somewhere in Pennsylvania, but I think it's in Philadelphia. That I saw a woman that she was an intern at that museum, I guess, while she was doing her graduate work, and she had done a bunch of research and had been involved in the conservation of that piece. Oh my God, these shell pieces, I'd heard of shell, sailors' valentines, which are the kind of shell things that, supposedly sailors made and sent home to their beloveds. And those are pretty, they're heart-shaped things and, beautiful shells. That was what I thought I was going to see when I went to this lecture about this shell scene. It is amazing the things that people made. And this was a really popular craft in the late 1700s, early 1800s for, more well-off women to get a bunch of shells and make these things. So, it sounds like Helen must have been knowledgeable about that stuff. So anyway, Electra's letters often contained encouraging notes and praise for Helen. The doll with the fan is without a doubt one of the loveliest you have ever done. You must be tired of hearing me repeat again and again how much I love your things and what marvelous taste you have. I never get tired of compliments like that. On June 1st, 1954, Electra wrote, "Ralph Hill is writing a book on the museum, and he speaks of the Helen Bruce room." That's a book I want to find. I want your name to go down in history as it deserves to. The story of the Shelburne Museum, published in 1955, contains this entry for the Hat and Fragrance Gallery. The so-called Bruce Room contains miniature vitrines showing rooms, houses, and shops fitted out with Lilliputian furnishings of various periods. All this infinite workmanship was accomplished by Mrs. Helen Bruce of California. The last letter. In 1956, at age 76, Helen moved from Los Angeles to Pacific Palisades. Her new house was smaller, but she set up one room as a studio and wrote to Electra that she was quite eager to begin her work again. Helen's last letter to Electra, dated June 19, 1960, described a doll she had made for the Flying Staircase of Dolls, an exhibit of 35 antique dolls arranged on an elegant double staircase. We looked at that, and I don't know how to describe it other than it's got like it's this little scene of this like very elegant like mansion staircase kind of thing, like the kind of staircase that like Cinderella walks down, right? And it's got all of these dolls like up on the top, coming down the staircase, and then sort of grouped around the bottom of the staircase. And they are dolls that range in size from like, you know, these dolls to little tiny ones. And so it seems like let me just read it to you. It seems like she dressed all of these dolls herself. So she's written about this particular doll. This one was dressed in beautiful Louis XVI silk and the original trimming from old dress. So it sounds like she retrofits these as needed. Like if their clothing is tattered, she replaces it. And it seems like, you know, if she's sourcing these old dolls, she's doing her best to sort of maintain their period quality. I have her standing in a glass jar as the dress covers it and keeps its form. So I think she set the doll legs first down in a jar, and then the dress comes down over this jar. I have a few jewels to paste back as it's hard to make them stick. I still hope I shall see the museum again, for when Boscobel is finished, I shall be most eager to see what my friends have done. And if I do get to New York, I shall get them to take me to Shelburne. The rest of the letter, more personal in nature, provides some insight into Helen's early life, about which little is known beyond what she reveals to her friend and business associate in her letters. Electra died a few months after receiving this last letter. It was my 80th birthday, June 14th, and it's hard for me to realize I am so old. Well, taking it all in all, mine has been a very happy life, and in many ways it is now happier than the past years. When I was in Paris and saw the house I lived in and how broken-hearted I was that my husband thought I should go to New York and try to support us, as he said he would not give up his life for any woman or child. Okay. This guy sounds like a jerk. I think of how wonderful it was that it happened. I was able to support him and Roy and at the same time make a wonderful life for myself. So what very little we know about Helen Bruce's life is that Mr. Bruce was a real dick and it did nothing to support her and her child. So she had to support all three of them, it sounds like. Which, my gosh, was not the normal thing at this time period. At least not with people that are more of an upper class. I mean, you certainly hear about stories where, you know, the no good guy, is living off of his wife's efforts, but it's things like that happen much more now than they did back then, I think. At least that's my purview. All my misfortunes have turned out wonderfully. Few people can say that. My best love to you, dear Electra, all of gratitude for the lovely things you have done for me. My best of friends, devotedly, Helen. She sounds like a great lady. Poor thing, you know, in terms of if it's true that she had to, you know, support her husband like that. Like, gross. I mean, certainly if he was disabled or something, you know, much older than her, whatever, you understand that. But if he was just taking this attitude of like, I'm not giving up anything in my life for no lady and kid. So, in any event. So that is Helen. I hope you enjoyed her. She is, at the very least, a fantastic miniatures artist. And like I said, I do want to go to the Shelburne at some point in the near future. I think probably my biggest frustration would be not being able to like open a vitrine and touch things. Just like the Queen's dollhouse. I wanted to go play with the stuff. So, let's see. Are we ready to get into our Mavis Fitzrandolph? So, I have pictures on the screen, and I'll keep them up so that you can just look at them while I read. So these are a little bit later in the chapter. Let me scroll back to some of the other ones. You know, it's unfortunate these are all in black and white. So let's see. We'll put this one up in the muscle gatherers. I thought the muscle gatherers were really interesting. Get both of them in there. Ah. Okay. All right. We have gotten to chapter 2. And as a reminder, we are reading, oh gosh, let me get all the details for you. I don't have a front cover of this book, but this book is called Traditional Quilting, Its Story and Its Practice by Mavis Fitzrandolph. And this is specifically about quilts of, I don't want to say British Isles. I think we're just talking about quilts of England. She touched very briefly, I think, on one Scottish quilt she mentioned, and then she's mentioned some quilts from Wales. So I think we're talking about like the island of England, England, Wales, and Scotland. This book was published in 1956. And on Monday we read the preface and chapter 1. And we are now on chapter 2. And chapter 2 is titled The Quilters. Let me zoom in here. Okay. Chapter 2, The Quilters. There are many quilters living today who learnt their craft towards the end of the 19th or at the beginning of the 20th century. And from what they have told me, and from examination of the quilts made by them and by their forebears, generally on the distaff side, though there are men too in the story, I have pieced together a picture of the home craft of quilting as it was carried out during the past 150 years in the countryside of South Wales and north of England. So a couple things about that first sentence. It's 1956, so it's interesting that, you know, end of the 19th, early 20th century is when the people she's talking to learned how to quilt. You know, and again, I look at, you know, the 1950s, only 70 years ago. I know at one time I would have thought 70 years is an eternity. Now I don't think of it that way. So, you know, this you know, just a number of years ago, we had access to people from the late 19th century. I think that's just amazing. The other thing she says, their forebears, their ancestors, generally on the distaff side, that means the mother's side. I can't remember where that comes from, but the distaff is a tool used in spinning. It's like a pointy part that goes on your spinning wheel, or it kind of goes to the side, and you put the big ball of whatever it is you're spinning, and it's typically going to be flax or wool that would go on one of those, and it's just your big wad of whatever, and you put it on the distaff. The distaff is what Sleeping Beauty pricked her finger on. Or no, was it Sleeping Beauty? No, not Rapunzel. Rumpelstiltskin. That one. Rumpelstiltskin pricked his finger, or she pricked her finger. I can't get it together today. the princess or whatever she was in Rumpelstiltskin's story, she pricked her finger on the distaff because it was pointy. Okay, moving right along. Here, women worked at the quilt frame in many farmhouses and cottages, and in a few of the great houses, though in some cases only in the kitchen or servants' hall. Many families in Wells, like that of Mrs. Bowen, whose people came from Pembrokeshire to Mount Ash, looked on a quilting frame as part of the home, like they did here in the U.S. Quilts were part of our lives, said another, like tables and chairs. Mr. George Davies, the son of a Pembrokeshire quilter, described a childhood memory, probably shared by hundreds, when he wrote, "I have the make of the frame and my mother sitting there, hour after hour, very vivid in my mind." In the north of England, there were twilts, Twilts, and I'm assuming that means quilts. And many of the older generations still use this pleasant word and speak also of the patrons on them, I think meaning patterns. And she spells that Pattrons. Though with the spread of standardized pronunciation, these forms are dying out. In Westmoreland, I have been told that there were quilts in all the farmhouses in the old days. A lot of quilting was done on the farms in the winter, said Mrs. Robinson. They reckoned to make a rag mat and so many quilts each year. She herself had made 15 one winter, being in need of them for the farm hands and having a maid who was keen on the work. In Cumberland, too, you would find them in every farmhouse, several on a bed. In Northumberland, in the old days, everyone quilted, and most country families still own quilts, though some do not use them much now because they are so heavy to wash. Which, I think they were probably filling them with wool. And wool can be lightweight, but it can also, depending on how thickly you pack it in there, it can be kind of heavy. Throughout country Durham, there are many old quilts to be found, particularly in Weardale. I might not be pronouncing that one right. The point of view of those old days, so often referred to, was expressed by an elderly lady here, who, after visiting a neighbor who was ill in bed, exclaimed in shocked surprise, "Not one twilt did she have!" A twilt. That's the first time I've heard that reference, a twilt and a patron. For many little girls, the sight of mother sitting at her quilting frame might mean that they had a task which would keep them from their play. They must thread a number of needles and stick them in a corner of the quilt ready to use. This is something that we hear from lots of people here in the United States. I think even my mother mentioned, when women would get together over a frame to quilt, the kids that were around would be responsible for threading needles because it's better to keep quilting and just grab a new needle than to have to stop, thread a needle. It's good to have a new one to grab right away. I do that for myself sometimes. Like I'll thread, like 3 or 4 needles just to be able to grab and keep going. It's a good productivity tool and no AI involved. Several Welsh women recalled that this always had to be done as soon as they got home from school. A Durham woman used to thread needles for an old Yorkshire quilter, born on the same day as Queen Victoria, at Guisborough, where she lived as a girl. But for Mrs. Hitchcock, County Durham, this task was a treat, for she was allowed to leave her lessons twice a week to thread needles for a group of quilters who worked to raise funds for the Methodist chapel. Round and round I went, sticking the needles in their little pin cushions. Stories of the old quilters show how work at the frame might be a regular part of the farm routine. Miss Humble of Weardale, who quilted and marked the patterns on quilts for a living, was never in bed after 5 a.m. The farm work was done by 9, and then she quilted till noon. After dinner, there were the calves to feed and other farm jobs. A big quilt with an elaborate pattern took Mrs. J.E. Pert, working together with her mother and aunt, 6 weeks to make in the time spared from farm work. Miss Humble never quilted by lamplight, but others of that hardy race, like a farmer's wife near Bellingham in Northumberland, worked by candlelight. And we know that their sewing tools often had mirrors. So you'd see sewing clamps and work boxes that had mirrors in them. And that purpose was to reflect the candlelight and make it brighter. Quilting and mat making was all they had to do in the long winter evenings. When this old lady died, she left a mass of quilts, some plain and some patched, which were divided among the family. One of her descendants thought she might have stored away, but had none in use. She had some stored away, but had none in use. The Mrs. Johnson in Hexhamshire had 2 glass globes for magnifying quilt light to quilt by. Okay, that's an interesting one. I have not heard of that. Like those which were used by Buckinghamshire lace makers. The candles themselves were made at home. Candle making day was Granny's delight. Oh my God. This is really interesting. I mean, this is stuff that I never heard of this. A globe. I wonder if we're just talking about like, think about like the chimneys that are on like oil lamps. I'm wondering if that's what she's talking about. Like maybe it's something that sits over the lamp and it's curved so I don't know. Or maybe it's something that's sat nearby to reflect. I don't know. Inquiring minds want to know. Oh. Okay. Robin corrected me. It was Sleeping Beauty, not Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin had to spin the was it straw into gold? Oh my gosh, I'm terrible to get my my fairy tales mixed up. So yes, Sleeping Beauty, distaff, pointy thing, pricked her finger. So Robin agrees that it might be a lamp globe. Yeah. That makes the most sense to me. I mean, because I have never seen an object, but I have seen like, sort of rounded globes that would go over a lamp. A Welsh woman recalled how her mother would say one day, "We'll start a quilt tomorrow at 9 and we'll work on it till 4. And so they did. As soon as father had gone to work, the essential chores were hurriedly done, and then the frame was set up. Mother and daughter worked steadily till 4, and then put the frame aside in time to get tea ready for father, who came home at 5. If we hadn't kept to mother's plan, we should never have got a quilt done. We were always so busy. I think this gives the answer to those who now say that there was more quilting done in the old days because people had more time and weren't so busy as we are now. In fact, they were probably busier, because fewer necessities could be bought ready-made, and many more tasks had to be done by hand in the kitchen and household. Shops were fewer and far distant from many country homes, with no buses by which to reach them quickly. But making quilts was as necessary as making bread, and therefore time had to be found for it. These statements about quilting in the old days, roughly 1880 to 1910, refer generally to the countryside rather than to the towns. But the craft was brought into the mining districts of South Wales and of County Durham from the rural areas. Many quilters in the Rhondda and Aberdare and Merthyr, I think we're getting into some Welsh names here, that have told me that their families came from Carmarthenshire or Pembrokeshire to the Durham mines. Families migrated from Teesdale and Weardale, and from Cleveland, which is in Yorkshire. A Northumberland mining village remembers that a trainload of Devonshire people brought up to break a strike included wives who brought their quilt frames. Mrs. Lace of Aberdare uses a frame which was made in Scotland early in the 19th century and was brought down to Wales by her grandfather. Mrs. Lace was a quilter. I wonder if Mrs. Lace also made lace. So brought down to Wales by her grandfather, who, returning to his birthplace there after the death of his parents, selected only this and an oak bureau to take home with him. Well, that's interesting. Her grandfather only valued an oak bureau and a quilt frame. Toward the end of the 19th century, probably the majority of quilters in the North Country and a great many in South Wales were what I would call home quilters. That is to say, they made quilts only for their own families, not for a living. Quilting was a family affair. Often mother and granny, or mother and an aunt, worked together at the frame, and the daughters would learn, as soon as they were old enough to sew, often at 14, by helping their mother at the frame. Mrs. Isabella Fletcher, County Durham, learnt when she was 11 from the old lady in the house in which she was nursemaid, who was quilting stays for the children. Okay, quilting stays for the children. I'm assuming we're talking about like, it's basically a bodice. It's not really a corset. It's more of a bodice, but even children wore those. And who also quilted petticoats for herself. Mrs. Ritson also learned at 11 from her elder sister. So this is, I mean, for the time period, I think what we're learning about the British versus here in the U.S., I think it's pretty similar. These girls were learning fairly young. Mrs. Hick's mother, a Nottinghamshire woman, only learned to quilt when she came to live in County Durham. When her older children had all gone out to work, she started the youngest girl at the frame to keep her at home. Another woman remembers how, as a small girl, she was rapped over the knuckles by her mother when she didn't do it right. Oh, geez. One or two others learnt rough from their mothers, doubtless to work on household quilts, and later learned finer work and a greater variety of patterns from professional quilters. In a certain Carmarthenshire family, when mother came home with a new idea for a quilt pattern, father would clear the floor and chalk the pattern according to her instructions on the stone flags. When work was started on the quilt, the daughters all helped with the sewing. This was not the only man who played his part in the quilting. So this is weird. Like, he chalked it on the floor. So, I mean, was it just a reference? Or did that somehow get from the chalk on the floor to the fabric? I don't know. She doesn't say. When work was started on the floor, the daughters all helped with the sewing. So this is not the only man who played his part in the quilting. In the north of England, where more permanent templates for pattern marking were found, these were often cut from plywood or even tin by the menfolk, who sometimes produced new shapes from their own ideas. Mrs. William Hodgson's husband always kept a supply of needles threaded for her when she was quilting regularly under the Rural Industry Bureau's scheme, which she's going to go into in Chapter 3, but she did mention it. I think it was Chapter 1. It might have been the preface, but we've heard about rural industries. And he holds the stick, meaning criticizes. Mrs. Reevely told me how, in her youth, at Jarrow-on-Tyne, when a group of women were making quilts for the chapel funds, the menfolk would come and thread needles for them. That's pretty funny. I had not heard of the men threading needles. I'd always heard of being children, but that's the reality here in the U.S. Quite possibly men did needle threading too here. It hasn't come down in our lore. Then they had refreshments for all and made a party of it. Unemployed husbands did the washing up when their wives were busy on quilts, because when your hands are softened by being much in water, they more easily become sore from needle pricks. That is true. If you hand wash dishes, you lose your needle calluses, your quilting calluses. Ask me how I know. It was an unemployed Welsh miner who asked me once if I remembered the corner pattern on his wife's last quilt. Rose and leaves it was. Well, I worked one of those corners myself. Very proud of it, he was. Ah, that's funny. Oh, okay. Kate. Hey, Kate. So Kate says, I'm assuming the floor was tile, so great. Could be. Yeah. I mean, they were flagstones. So, yeah. And so I guess maybe that could be the reference. Yeah. I mean, that's a good hypothesis. Robin said stays in children's clothing were corset-like garments for support and posture. Oh, yeah. Yeah. They, children's stays. Oh, so, yeah. So you see, stable structure, excellent posture, straight spine, yada, yada. It also had to do with the fact that women wore stays or corsets to help manage the weight of the dresses and the clothing, and just for structure. I mean, the same way that we wear, undergarments now, like, brassieres and things like that. And yes, children had the same thing because they were wearing essentially adult clothes. They were just wearing tiny adult clothes. They didn't have like children's clothes necessarily. Little kids kind of wore dresses, whether they were boys or girls. And so, depending on like the fashion, of the period, they may need that structure and support in the same way that women would need because of the weight of their clothing. So, yeah. They also made other interesting things for children, like, what are they called? Pudding caps. They were like essentially like helmets for children when they were learning to walk. They were made out of quilted things. So the girls of the family all helped in making quilts, said a Welsh woman, and as each was married, she had all the quilts she needed. This was an important part of a girl's dowry. 6 seems to have been the usual allowance in Wales. I mean, same thing we have here in the U.S. in terms of the story, but here it was a dozen. And the 13th being your bride's quilt, or the 12th being your bride's quilt, which would be your finest quilt. In Westmoreland and Cumberland, quilts were always made for a girl's wedding, and in the latter county, sometimes for the young man too, if he came of a farming family. A Welsh itinerant quilter said she had made marriage quilts for men, and once she had made half a dozen quilts for a lad who was going away to a job in the Midlands. Evidently, his mother was determined that he should have his home comforts in that distant place. Many marriage quilts were shown to me in Northumberland and County Durham, but here it seemed to be the custom for just one very handsome quilt to be made by a woman for her daughter's wedding. They do not seem to have been made anywhere in this country in such quantities as in America, where Ruth Finley tells us a bride's dower chest in the old days should contain a dozen ordinary quilts, as well as the bride's quilt, which was only made when she became engaged. So I did remember my facts. A Northumberland quilter made one for her older daughter, but the younger one, a few years later, scorned the idea because quilting had gone out by then, about 1920 to 1930. A girl in County Durham turned down the offer of a marriage quilt at about the same time, but regretted it when she read in a newspaper soon afterwards that Welsh and Durham quilts were being made for one of London's most expensive hotels. Now, this is interesting because if you were here when I looked at that quilts during the war exhibit that I saw at Festival of Quilts, you may remember there were the quilted dressing gowns, and then there was that one new look jacket. And remember, the info that we found out was that the girl that it was made for, her mother made it. While we look at it and think it's fantastic and beautiful, she was embarrassed by it because it was made out of, quilted embroidered fabric that was homemade and not, something new and purchased. So I think that we've got the same thing going on in England that was kind of happening here to some degree. But like then we had the Great Depression, and then they had the war issues that we didn't necessarily get hit with as badly. So you have it seems to me, many of the same things happening, but the decades are just a little bit different than they were here, it seems like. If you guys agree with me. Making marriage quilts for her daughters and sometimes for her sons, cradle quilts for the new generation, and workaday quilts to keep all members of the household snug at nights must have kept the housewife busy. And she was glad of help from anyone in the family who could sew well, and even from neighbors who were sometimes invited in to help. And so the party went from house to house, said one Welsh informant, and others, both in Wales and Northumberland, also told how several neighbors, sometimes 4 or 5, would work together at the frame, making a quilt for each of them in turn. The quilt so made would be only for home use. The professional quilter, whose work was her livelihood, frowned on this communal quilting. As Mrs. Thomas Aberdare said, the making of a quilt was regarded as craft. The craftswoman would start and finish the job herself. It was something in which any casual caller was not allowed to interfere. When two worked at one frame, it was the case of one craftswoman and an apprentice who spent 2 years before she served her time. Mrs. Armstrong, a very fine Northumberland quilter, also said that although she had been asked to work with neighbors at the frame, it was a thing she never liked doing. Now, this is interesting that there are professional quilters. I mean, certainly we had this here in the U.S., but they were sort of women that had kind of made a place for themselves, right? Like Marie Webster. She designed quilts, started doing kits and patterns, and and this is like just after the turn of the century, like 1915, up into the 20s and I guess 30s. But I mean, we look at her as like a self-made woman, and it is rare. The number of women that were working in that capacity in the early 20th century were, I mean, between us, we can name them all, Some of them weren't actually quilters. I mean, Ruth Finley wrote about quilting, but she wasn't actually a quilter. So you kind of have to take somebody like her out of the equation. The people that were actually, quilting as a profession were, again, few and far between. So it's interesting to look at, to hear her talk about these professional craftswomen, and they're sort of basing their work on that apprenticeship kind of, not really guild, because it doesn't seem like there's a guild aspect to this, but that apprentice kind of format that, happened with lots of different, crafts and industries, handmade industries at that time. So that's interesting to me. I mean, and here in the U.S., I mean, you'd still have apprentices in terms of like building trades, a stonemason or a bricklayer or carpentry, and even today we have apprentices. But I just don't know that unless we're talking. I mean, there are a few situations, I think, where you've kind of got professional quilters that had sort of an intern or an apprentice. I think there's this master quilter kind of thing, designation. I don't know what that entails. But yeah, like it seems like it's a different setup than we have here in that aspect. Mrs. Bowen from a Pembrokeshire family told how her mother made her first quilt in 1873 at Clinderwen in the home of the Gower family where she was chambermaid. It was a big household with 22 servants, and when the dressmaker paid her annual visit and stayed for some weeks making ball dresses and other gowns for the ladies, all the cuttings were saved and given to the maids to make into patchwork. Oh, now this is interesting. We often talk about like that period, late 1800s, and women here in the U.S., getting fabric from dressmakers, or they were dressmakers themselves, or milliners, young women, sort of trading scraps, like that kind of thing. I don't know that I've ever heard a story of a great household where a dressmaker came and stayed. Like, that's, at least here, you got to be pretty wealthy for something like that to happen. I'm sure some of those captains of industry, the robber barons and the railroad tycoons and all that, I'm sure they probably had situations that could have supported that kind of scenario. But I mean, that's not something that you'd hear about from here. But on the flip side of that, having a dressmaker come and you have all this cabbage of fabric, I mean, what an amazing bounty, whether you're rich or poor, to have access to all of that fabric. That's pretty awesome. Okay. When a facing was completed, the maker was given a piece of print for the backing, and then it was set up in the frame and quilted. So I guess what she's calling facing would be whatever the top is. Mrs. Bowen still had the quilt made by her mother in this way, of silk patches in rich and gay colors with a paisley style print on the reverse side. So, yeah, I mean, this is, so 1873, like, this is the sort of the heyday of Industrial Revolution related fabric production, I think. I mean, this is like, things are big and exciting at this point. The old lady, she said, didn't like the maids to go out at night, and so encouraged them to stay in and work on their quilts. The professional quilters I will classify as 1, village quilters, of whom there were many throughout South Wales and some in the North Country, and with them I include the North Country pattern makers. Number 2, itinerant quilters, seldom heard of outside South Wales. And 3, women who ran quilt clubs, which were a feature of the mining districts in both areas. Interesting. All right, so first, village quilters. A certain Mary Jones of Panteg near Llanarth, Cardiganshire, commonly known as Mary Panteg, who died about 1900, seems to have been one of the most famous of Welsh village quilters and is perhaps typical of them all. Many women in that district still treasure her quilts. She had orders for miles around, particularly from girls about to be married. She lived in a primitive little stone cottage of 1 story and worked by the light of a tiny single-paned window. I don't know how these women didn't go blind. I mean, one of her quilts, which I have seen, made about 1850 when she was a young woman, is a good piece of work, closely stitched in an elaborate pattern, and was said to be typical. She is reputed to have been able to sew as well with her left hand as with her right. What? Oh my God, can you imagine that? Being able to quilt with both hands? I wonder if she did it at the same time. Or if she started quilting with her other hand when her right hand got tired. I've never heard of that. Good grief. Morning and night she was at them, but working with her apprentice, she could hardly make 2 quilts in a week, and she never made more than 4 and 6 or 5 shillings for the making. Wow, that's not a lot of money. It was the general rule that customers brought their own materials to be quilted and paid for the work. 1 quilt a fortnight was said by several people to be the usual rate of output for a professional quilter working alone. So 1 quilt every 2 weeks. But there were many variations. As in the North, some worked late with a candle on the quilt, and others only by daylight. And with a candle on the quilt is in quotes. I think she means that's just a turn of phrase. They didn't actually put the candle on the quilt. It was just there by the side. And others only by daylight. Mrs. Catherine Evans, 50 years ago, worked only 8 days on a handsome quilt with a good deal of close stitching in it, which she was still, in 1950, keeping unused for her niece. So she made that quilt in 1900 and was still keeping it unused in 1950. I'm wondering if that's why when we find here in the US, you find these like quilts that look like they, they're 200 years old, but they've never seen the light of day. I'm wondering if that's what it was. They make, a quilt maker makes like this really stunning and stellar quilt, and they keep holding on to it for some reason. And maybe that reason never comes, I mean, it sounds like she's holding on to it for her niece, who I guess maybe as a wedding gift. What if the niece never gets married or something happens? That could explain why sometimes we have some incredible stuff. Hey, Nun Maker, how are you? Are these people doing the piecing too, or did the patron bring a completed flimsy to be finished? Well, so from what I've figured out so far, a lot of these quilts were whole cloth quilts, so they weren't pieced at all. And I would say probably in Wales, these Welsh quilters, I'm guessing in a lot of cases they may have just been whole cloth or very basic piecing. So a lot of those early Welsh quilts almost have like an Amish quilt look to them. I mean, you guys know what an Amish quilt looks like, the really basic ones. So I don't know. It does seem like it's the quilting that they're doing and not the patchwork, because they were pretty clear about patch versus quilt. Whereas here, at least in the first chapter, she kind of said, like, here in the US, there's kind of this blurring of the terminology, whereas in there in England, they were very specific. Like, you were a patchworker or you were a quilter, and they don't necessarily, yeah, 2 weeks for piecing and quilting. Yeah, exactly. And in this one, Catherine Evans, in 8 days. God, I worked ceaselessly at a quilt that was not that big. It was 42 by 42 inches. This one I finished recently, and the hand quilting on it nearly killed me, and took me much longer than 8 days. I can tell you that. So Mrs. Eleanor Williams said it took 2 weeks to make a quilt, working from 8 or 9 in the morning till about 6 and only stopping to eat. But her working time must have been shorter in winter, for she only worked by daylight. What I have seen of her work is much rougher than Mrs. Evans, with simple patterns. Mrs. Coleman, an elderly woman quilting for her living, completes a quilt in 4 or 5 days, and it is well drawn and sewn, though the patterns are big and widely spaced with no close work. So yeah, this all sounds like it's specifically the quilting. It is not any type of piecing with these professional ladies. A North Country woman, Mrs. Reevely, said that in her young days she could make a quilt in 2 weeks, sitting close at it and working all day and by lamplight too. In all these cases, the time included designing and marking the patterns as the work proceeded. But another North Country woman, Mrs. Johnson, now I'm at pictures, of Allendale, told how it took herself, her mother, and a friend 10 days to sew a quilt on which the pattern had already been drawn. This was very close and elaborate work. So let me scroll through here to show you the new pictures. So, so this one, it says quilt by Miss Amaya Jones, Carmarthenshire. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I'm wondering if some of this is Trapunto, maybe. This looks like it could be stuffed work. But gosh, look at that detail. I mean, you can really, really see some amazing quilting in there. Good grief. Yeah, that's some pretty intense work there. And then this one, is this this just says yellow silk quilt, 18th century. So, my gosh, though, look at that. And then this, let's see this one. Patchwork quilt with plain white underside, made by Joseph Headley, known as Joe the Quilter, of Warden, Northumberland, late 18th or early 19th century. We will be reading the story of Joe the Quilter. I know I've read it to you guys before, but it was a really long time ago, and I assume lots of people may not have heard the story. The story of Joe the Quilter is actually in the appendix to this book, so we won't get to it for a while. But Joe the Quilter is a very interesting story, and it's a tragic story because he was murdered. Yeah, so he was piecing and quilting. We know that. So this is interesting. I did not know that there were existing quilts of his that could be viewed. So I'm wondering where this is. I'm gonna have to track it down. But I mean, you can see, you recognize this chintz type. These are chintz pieces. Okay, I think that might have been all the pictures for now. So we'll keep this on Joe's quilt. Okay, even considering the lower cost of living some 50 years or more ago and the simple way of life in the villages, one wonders how the labor of the professional quilters really provided them with a living. Live they did, however, many of them to a ripe old age. You know how many times I've read about, how quilters live so long? I think there's something to that, you guys. If you're making quilters, I mean, if you're making quilts, there's a good chance you're going to live a very long time because it's good for you. In the North, there were also many women who made quilts to order for a living, generally in the rural districts such as Weardale and Allendale, and the more northern and westerly parts of Northumberland. In the pit villages, quilt clubs, which she's going to talk about in a minute. So in pit villages, quilt clubs were the rule. And so a pit village, I think, is a mining town. Though work on club quilts might be interrupted for a ready money order. Some workers supplied shops in the towns, as also happened in South Wales. And Miss Humble, already mentioned, had many orders from the USA, though a relative who had emigrated. Through a relative who had emigrated. Other orders from America and also Australia and elsewhere far afield have been mentioned. My gosh, can you imagine like early 20th century Australia? You know, like I don't know how fast the mail got there. But I mean, it would have had to have been a transplant, you know, from England to Australia or something, or a very long correspondence that, I guess. Okay. Quilting was sometimes a sideline to dressmaking, and probably had been so since the 18th century or earlier. And that makes sense, you know, like, and I feel like it's kind of maybe the same thing here, that, you know, people who made quilts either being connected to dressmakers or having, you know, some kind of connection there if they themselves were not a dressmaker. Miss Annie Williams went at the age of 18 to learn dressmaking from an old woman in a Carmarthenshire village and picked up the quilting at the same time. In the same way, Mrs. Parker of Durham learned to quilt when she served her time with a tailor dressmaker. Afterwards, she used to mark the patterns on quilts for her mother, and in later years, she was well known as a very fine quilter. Joe the Quilter, who is Northumberland's rival to Mary Pentag, and who was born about 1750, was intended by his father to be a tailor, and was probably apprenticed to one such and learnt to quilt as a part of the trade. Which makes sense because, I mean, quilted garments, you know, I mean, certainly predate 1750. So it makes sense that that's kind of where he went. By the time Joe began work on his own, quilted waistcoats and underskirts would be going out of fashion, and we can imagine that his taste for gay and elaborate design, indicated by one of his surviving quilts, which I think is what we're looking at now, inclined him to concentrate on quilting and patchwork in preference to the more austere kind of tailoring which was becoming vogue. Certainly he earned his living by those crafts in his old age until he was murdered at the age of 76 in 1825 in his cottage near Warden Village for the sake of his rumored wealth. His work was well known locally, and some of it is said to have gone to America. I'm wondering if I have ever heard of any quilts that made it here. I don't know that I've ever heard. I honestly did not know that anything that he made actually survived. So seeing this one and then the fact that some came to the U.S. would be interesting. Hey, Nunmaker, it's the sheer will to outlive your stash. Exactly. Really committed quilters are like, okay, I have more fabric than I can use in 12 lifetimes, but I shall at least get one of them. Get one of those lifetimes taken care of. There are still a number of women in both the quilting areas who supplement small incomes by making quilts for private customers or shops. But the days are past when girls worked as Durham women have described. From leaving school at 14 until I married, I had to sit and quilt, day in and out, and no sooner one out of the frame until another went in. And me, all the time, longing to be out with the other young people. My mother trying to talk to me and me not answering. That memory of about 1927 gives the darker side of the picture of quilting in the 20th century. The village quilter, who was a single woman, often took an apprentice. In this way, Mrs. Lewis learnt to quilt at the age of 16 from Mary Pentag in order to support her widowed mother, who did not come from a quilting family. No payment was made on either side, but the pupil did odd jobs for her teacher as well as helping her at the frame. In another case of apprenticeship in Wales, the girl lived with her teacher, to whom her parents paid £2, presumably for her board for the year. Although Mrs. Thomas, who was quoted above, spoke of a girl serving her time for 2 years, 1 year seems to be usual in Wales. In the Weardale and Allendale districts of County Durham and Northumberland, there was and still is another kind of professional worker in the quilting industry, the pattern maker, or stamper, as she was sometimes called. Generally, a quilter designs and marks her own patterns. We'll see this in future chapters. But pattern makers who were not necessarily quilters themselves have been known in the past. In the middle of the 18th century, a schoolmaster in the village of Mayfield in Sussex called Walter Gale, who was undoubtedly a craftsman and a man of parts, began to supplement his salary from jobs which varied from decorating inn signs, so like pubs and inns, in the neighborhood to painting the commandments in the chancel of the church. This is a man of many talents. He drew patterns for ladies' embroidery and helped to create designs for gentlemen's waistcoats. It took him 5 days of close application to draw the pattern on one quilt, for which he charged 19 shillings and sixpence. The lady was pleased with the work, but her husband said it was a pretty deal of money. A London haberdasher in the same century advertised that he drew all sorts of patterns, which probably including designs for quilting. It seems likely that so long as quilting was in vogue for adorning the clothing and bed furnishings of the fashionable world, there would be men skilled in drawing designs for the work, just as there were, even up to about 30 years ago, men prickers who designed and pricked the parchments which serve as patterns for pillow lace makers. And we actually looked at that pricking and pouncing thing. I had a picture, or kind of a bad picture, from Hand and Lock. They showed where some of their patterns had been pricked and pounced. And I mean, that's the transfer method that people used for all kinds of needlework back then. And actually some people still do. The evidence indicates that they studied the technique of the crafts for which they designed, and their patterns would therefore be far more suitable than most of the transfer designs sold nowadays. Bear with me 1 minute. This is a really long chapter, you guys. I might stop here. Okay. Well, let's go over a little bit because I think I can get there. So the evidence indicates that they, meaning men, had studied the technique of the crafts for which they designed, and their patterns would therefore be far more suitable than most of the transfer designs sold nowadays. Oh, let's see. Yeah, I think she's still talking about the men. During the latter half of the 19th century, a certain George Gardner of Allendale in Northumberland marked patterns on quilt tops. He had many followers, but I have been unable to discover whether he had any immediate predecessors to link him with the 18th century markers. Like Walter Gale, he was a man of parts. He kept the Allen Heads village shop, and a lovely shop it was, as old people in the village will still tell you, in Mill Cottages, Dirt Pot, which is now more politely known as Ropehoff, though a youth hostel preserves the old name, Dirt Pot. He also trimmed hats, and girls would walk up from Allendale town or over the fells from Warehead, some 6 or 7 miles, to get their hats trimmed by his master hand. Oh my gosh, 7 miles. He introduced a new style of design for quilts, which became very popular in Weardale and throughout Northumberland. He taught his wife's 2 nieces, who were brought up by the Gardners, to quilt and mark patterns, and one of them is still active. But his most notable pupil was Elizabeth Sanderson, who served her time with him as apprentice and became even more famous than he as a stamper. The terms stamper and stamped quilt were used in the belief that Miss Sanderson had some method of marking the design by a transfer, but in fact it was drawn in exact detail on the material with a blue pencil. She was paid from 1 shilling and 6 to 2 shillings for marking a quilt top, but she could mark 2 in a day. Whether Walter Gale's 5-day design was much larger and more elaborate, or whether he was merely slower because he was inexperienced in quilting, we do not know. But let's see, figure 14 shows that Miss Sanderson's work was far from simple. So I don't know if let's see. Yes, so this is Elizabeth Sanderson's marking. That's pretty amazing. This is very Welsh here. These spirals and then these sort of leafy shapes that are filled. That's very Welsh. The Mrs. Johnson in Hexhamshire recalled how Tommy Bell, the packman, had 1 or 2 of these drawn quilt tops as samples among the goods which he carried from farm to farm, just as peddlers in America sold patterns for quilting, as well as patchwork designs and weaving drafts. The English quilt tops were ordered by farmers' wives who wanted to make something especially grand or to give to a quilter as a wedding present. Miss Sanderson was herself a skilled quilter, as her Red Star quilt, which is here, as her Red Star quilt shows. But pattern marking seems to have been her main livelihood, and she left entirely to her sister the management of their farm at Fawside Green. I can't be pronouncing that right. It's Fawsid, Fawside. Allen Heads. She is said to have made a tidy bit in her time, and became so well known that she sometimes employed other workers in Allendale to make quilts for her. George Gardner had died shortly before the turn of the century. Miss Sanderson died in 1934 at the age of 73, but her pupils continue to this day to mark the same type of pattern, which must now have been in use for nearly 100 years. Wow. She taught many girls to quilt and mark patterns. Her first apprentice, who is very proud of this priority, was the daughter of a farming butcher at the head of Weardale. On leaving school at the age of 14 in the 1890s, she set out one morning to walk the 6 miles over the fell to Allen Heads, carrying her provisions for the week: bread, butter, sugar, and so forth. She served for 1 year without any payment on either side, going home at the end of each week and setting out again on Monday with her rations. She then became a paid hand, earning about 4 shillings a week, and her board and lodging. As Mrs. Coulthard of Weardale, she is still a noted quilter, using the Durham feather patterns as well as the designs she learned from Miss Sanderson, and she has marked many quilt tops for others. Miss Pert of Allendale was apprenticed a little later. She also started at the age of 14 and served for a year without payment, taking her own food. She worked from 8 in the morning till 7 at night, with an hour off for dinner and half an hour for tea, and she served for 6 years, being paid 2 shillings weekly in the second year, and finally 4 shillings. In 1952, she was charging 5 shillings for marking a quilt top, or 7 shillings if the material was silk, and she has had orders from many parts of England and even from Wales, and has one apprentice herself who is still at work. A highlight in Mrs. Coulthard's apprenticeship was the time of Queen Victoria's Jubilee, when they incorporated the Queen's head in a quilt pattern. Oh, I bet that was interesting. Probably like her profile. Mrs. Pert treasures the memory of how she worked on some silk quilts for a local titled lady, an unusual order at that time, and on one occasion helped her teacher draw a quilt top for a Sunderland Women's Guild to work for Queen Mary. And I will leave there. Next, she gets into the itinerant quilter. So this would be the one, people who would travel in Wales. All right. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm really liking her writing. Although I very seriously am stumbling over these British and Welsh names of towns and things. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna leave off there. Okay, where did my other screen go? Here we go. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week. If you're around on Saturday, Jill and I have a Stitch and Glitch, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. Look for the quilt nerding channel. It's going to be a short one this week, so probably about an hour or so. So, yeah, have a great Friday Eve. I hope to see you on Saturday, but if not, I will catch you on Monday. Yeah, so take care, guys. It was great to see some of you I have not seen in a while. Anon Maker, Kate. So take care, guys. I will talk to you soon. Mwah, mwah.